Jack had always lived a life of simplicity. He'd never had much, but that was okay. He'd learned to find contentment in the small things: the early mornings spent making breakfast for Ethan, the late nights spent fixing the old truck that barely ran, and the weekend soccer games that gave him a chance to watch his son's growing enthusiasm for the sport. The routine was predictable, but in its predictability lay a sense of stability that he clung to. Stability was what Ethan needed, and Jack was determined to give it to him, even if it meant sacrificing his own comfort and dreams. Their home was modest, a small bungalow in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't much: 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a living room that doubled as both a space for family time and Jack's makeshift workshop. The wallpaper in the living room was starting to peel, and the carpet was worn, but they had each other, and that was enough. Ethan, at 8 years old, had grown up in a world where Jack was both mother and father. Ava, his mother, had walked out when Ethan was just a baby, leaving Jack to raise him on his own. Over the years, Jack had learned to juggle both roles, stepping in as the disciplinarian when needed, and as the comforting figure when things went wrong. He wasn't perfect, but he tried. And in Ethan's eyes, Jack was everything: his protector, his teacher, his role model. The mornings were always the same. Jack would wake up early to start the coffee, prepare breakfast, and get Ethan ready for school. Ethan, despite being young, was a self-sufficient child. He knew the routine. He made his own bed, tied his shoes, and even helped Jack pack his lunch. It was a small but steady rhythm in their lives, and it worked for them. Jack would drop Ethan off at school, then head to the mechanic shop where he worked long hours, often with greasy hands and sore muscles. His paycheck was never much, but it was enough to cover rent, groceries, and the occasional outing with Ethan, like the trip to the local park or a cheap dinner at the diner. He didn't need much else. Weekends were for soccer games. Jack had always wanted to be more involved in Ethan's interests, so when Ethan expressed an interest in soccer, Jack dove in head first. They would spend hours at the field, Jack on the sidelines, cheering Ethan on as he dribbled, kicked, and ran with the other kids. Ethan's face would light up every time he scored a goal, and Jack would beam with pride. These moments were everything to him. Ethan, for his part, never asked about his mother. Jack had made a conscious decision not to bring her up, knowing how painful it would be for both of them. Ava had left without a word, a decision Jack had never truly understood. But as the years passed, the absence of her presence became the unspoken truth in their home. Ethan never questioned it. For all intents and purposes, Jack had been both parents rolled into one. But that wasn't to say there weren't moments when Jack could see the quiet curiosity in Ethan's eyes. There were occasional questions, innocent inquiries like, "Why don't we ever go visit Mom?" or "Why don't we have a picture of her?" Jack would always answer with a simple, "She's not around anymore, buddy," and leave it at that. Ethan seemed to accept it, though Jack couldn't help but wonder if, deep down, his son longed for something he couldn't quite name. The turning point came on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday morning. Jack had scheduled a routine checkup for Ethan, something he had been putting off for months but finally decided to take care of. They arrived at the hospital, which was crowded with people, patients waiting for appointments, families sitting anxiously in the waiting room. Jack could already feel the tension in the air, the hum of hospital machines, and the soft murmur of voices. Ethan, like most kids, fidgeted with his hands, shifting in his seat, while Jack kept an eye on the clock, counting down the minutes until they could leave. That's when it happened. Ethan's gaze drifted across the room, scanning the sea of people, when suddenly he froze. His eyes widened as he locked onto a woman who had just entered the waiting area. The woman was tall, elegantly dressed in a sharp business suit, her hair styled perfectly. She was surrounded by a small entourage, and the air around her seemed to hum with an aura of power and influence. Jack didn't think much of it at first. People like her were common at hospitals, after all. But then, before Jack could even register what was happening, Ethan pointed directly at the woman and said, "That lady looks like a boss." Jack turned to look at Ethan, half expecting him to be talking about someone else. But when he saw who Ethan was pointing at, his heart stopped. The woman in question was none other than Ava, Ethan's mother. But it wasn't the Ava Jack remembered from all those years ago. This woman was confident, poised, and commanding in a way that felt worlds apart from the young woman who had left them behind. She was, without a doubt, successful, impossibly so, as if she had stepped out of a different universe. Jack could hardly reconcile the woman before him with the girl who had once walked out of his life without a second glance. Ethan, oblivious to the significance of his words, continued, "She looks like a boss. Like the kind of person who owns stuff." Jack's throat went dry. He hadn't expected this. He had never imagined that one day Ethan would see Ava as someone so different. So much had changed in the years since she'd walked out, but he had never anticipated this moment, this collision of the past and present. Ethan didn't recognize her as his mother, and Jack wasn't sure what to say. He couldn't speak. Ethan, still focused on the woman, turned to Jack with wide eyes. "Dad, do you think she's important?" Jack swallowed, feeling a lump form in his throat. He didn't know how to answer. He hadn't prepared for this. "I don't know, buddy. I don't know." The rest of the waiting room seemed to fade into the background as Jack watched Ava move through the space with the kind of ease and confidence that only came from years of building something. A life, a career, success, all things Jack had once hoped for himself but had never truly attained. And yet, the most unsettling thought was that, despite all her success, the woman standing before him had chosen to leave her son behind. Ethan had never known her, but the weight of her absence seemed to hang between them now, more palpable than ever. Jack had worked so hard to build a stable life for his son, but this moment, this simple interaction had thrown everything into question. It was as if the world they had lived in for all these years, the one Jack had carefully constructed, was suddenly no longer enough. Jack stood at the entrance of the hospital room, his gaze fixed on the woman lying in the bed. The sight of her sent a shock through him, a feeling he hadn't expected. Ava, the woman who had once been the center of his world, was now a stranger in every sense of the word. Time had altered her beyond recognition. The vibrant, free-spirited woman who had once laughed and loved him and Ethan was gone. Instead, the woman before him looked weary, almost fragile, and yet there was something about her that seemed distant, unreachable. He hesitated, his hand resting on the door frame, unsure whether to step into the room. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. What was he supposed to say? After all these years, after everything that had happened, how could he even begin to approach her? The anger, the hurt, the confusion, it all surged back in a rush. He had never expected to see her again, certainly not like this, not in a hospital bed, looking so vulnerable and distant. The moment stretched on, long enough for him to feel the weight of time pressing down on him. Finally, Jack took a step forward, the uncertainty still lingering in his chest, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. He needed answers, needed closure, though he wasn't even sure what that would look like. When Ava's eyes finally flicked toward him, Jack's breath caught in his throat. She looked at him for a moment, as though trying to place him, before her eyes softened in recognition. Despite the years, despite the changes, she still remembered him. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Jack. Her voice was soft, distant, and yet it carried a weight of familiarity. There was no warmth in her tone, no rush to embrace the man she had once shared everything with. Instead, her words were measured, almost clinical. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He could feel the anger bubbling up, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the pull of something else, something deeper. He had spent so many years resenting her, trying to forget her abandonment, and yet, seeing her now, he couldn't deny the part of him that still longed for the woman she had been. "How are you?" Jack asked, his voice rough, betraying the turmoil swirling inside him. Ava's gaze shifted to the side, her eyes momentarily distant, as though she were caught in a memory. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the moment passed. She sat up a little straighter, her posture stiff, her eyes flicking back to him. "I'm fine," she said, her voice tight. "I've been through worse." The conversation felt awkward, like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. The words they exchanged were superficial, the pleasantries that strangers might share, but there was no warmth, no connection. Ava had become a version of herself that Jack couldn't understand. She was no longer the carefree, loving woman he had once known. She had changed, hardened by years of success and, perhaps, regret. She had built an empire, a businesswoman now, driven and powerful, but there was something about her eyes, something behind that polished exterior, that told a different story. He could see the sadness in her eyes, a sorrow that seemed to flicker beneath the surface, hidden from view but not entirely gone. It was a sadness that Jack couldn't place, but it was unmistakable. The woman before him was a far cry from the young girl who had once laughed in his arms, who had shared dreams and hopes for a future together. "How's Ethan?" Ava asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice lacked any real emotion, but Jack could hear the faint edge of curiosity beneath the detachment. At the mention of their son, Jack felt a jolt of anger rise up in him. Ethan, her son, too, had been abandoned in the wake of her disappearance. He was the one who had borne the brunt of her leaving. Jack's mind briefly flashed back to the nights when Ethan would cry for her, his little face twisted in confusion, asking over and over again why his mommy had left. The years of trying to be both mother and father to their child weighed heavily on him, and now, here she was, asking about him as if she had never walked out of their lives. Ethan, unaware of the complexity of the situation, stood near the door, his small hands clutching the frame as he peered in. His innocent eyes were filled with questions. "Mommy," he asked in a high, uncertain voice, his small face alight with hope. Jack's heart clenched. He could feel the tension building in the room, the undercurrent of unresolved emotions pulsing through the space. Ava's gaze flickered briefly toward Ethan, then back to Jack. She looked at her son, her expression unreadable, before turning her focus back to Jack. "She hasn't been around," Jack said coldly, his tone sharp, trying to keep the raw edge of his pain from spilling out. "Not since you left." Ava's lips tightened into a thin line, and for a moment, Jack thought she might say something, anything that would explain why she had abandoned her family. But she didn't. She only shrugged, her voice as distant as before. "I've been busy. Work has kept me occupied." The words felt empty. Jack's frustration built with every passing second. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask why she had left them behind without a second thought. He wanted to know why she had chosen her career over her family, over their son. But as much as the anger burned inside him, there was a part of him that still longed for the answers he would never get. The silence between them stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Ava reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, offering it to Jack with a calm, practiced smile. "If you ever want to talk," she said, her voice cool, "maybe we can reconnect. I'm available." Jack stared at the card in her hand, a mix of disbelief and confusion flooding through him. She was offering him a chance to reconnect? After everything? It felt almost laughable, like a hollow gesture meant to appease both of them, to give the illusion of closure. For a moment, Jack just stared at the card, unable to decide what to do with it. His fingers hovered over it, and then, in a moment of pure frustration, he pushed it aside. "I don't know what you think this is, Ava," he said, his voice low and strained. "But it's too late for all of this. You don't get to just waltz back into our lives and pretend like nothing happened." Ava's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded, accepting his rejection without a word. As Jack turned to leave, a heavy feeling settled in his chest, a mixture of anger, confusion, and, strangely, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But deep down, he knew the truth. The woman before him wasn't the same woman who had left them. And no matter how much he wished otherwise, nothing would ever change that. Jack's internal turmoil dominates the days following his unexpected encounter with Ava. It's as though a dam inside him has been broken, and the flood of emotions that come rushing in threatens to drown him. The memories of his life with Ava, once filled with laughter, shared dreams, and quiet moments of happiness, are now bitter reminders of the woman who left without a word. His heart is torn between resentment and betrayal, but amidst those emotions, there's an undeniable flicker of longing. He's haunted by the feeling of wanting to understand why she left, why the woman he once loved so deeply could so easily walk away from their life together. In the wake of seeing her again, Jack struggles to find peace. Each day feels heavier than the last as he tries to move through his routine, but Ava's absence in his life is a presence that refuses to be ignored. There's no escaping the memories. He remembers how they first met, how effortlessly they fell in love, and how, together, they built a future that seemed full of promise. They had been a family, and for a while, everything felt right. But then, one day, without warning, she was gone. No explanation, no closure. Just an absence that Jack could never fully understand or accept. Meanwhile, Ethan, Jack's young son, seems to be the only one unaware of the emotional storm unfolding in their household. With his innocent curiosity, he begins to ask questions about his mother, questions that Jack has been avoiding for years. Ethan doesn't understand why Ava is no longer a part of his life, why he has no memories of her. To a child, the absence of a mother is simply a mystery to be solved. He asks Jack why he doesn't see her, why she isn't there to tuck him in at night, and why she's never around for the little moments that every child hopes to share with their mother. Jack does his best to shield Ethan from the painful truth. He tells him that his mother is far away, that she's busy with work, trying to keep things simple and innocuous. But even as he says these things, Jack feels the weight of his lies. The answers he gives Ethan don't feel real to him. He knows that the real reason Ava isn't around has little to do with work or distance. It's because she chose to walk away, leaving them behind to chase her own dreams, dreams that, in Jack's mind, came at the expense of their family. Each time Ethan asks, the question gnaws at Jack more, reminding him of the void Ava left behind. It's a painful reminder of everything Jack has tried to bury, his anger, his hurt, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Then, just when Jack is beginning to believe that he's managed to push Ava from his thoughts, a letter arrives. It's an invitation from her, an invitation to meet for lunch. Jack feels a mixture of dread and curiosity. He hesitates, unsure if he's ready to face her again. The prospect of seeing her after all these years fills him with dread, but the need for answers, for some sense of closure, is almost unbearable. In the silence of his apartment, he wonders if he can finally confront the past or if it will just tear him apart again. After a few days of going back and forth in his mind, Jack agrees to meet her. The day of the lunch arrives, and he feels the weight of it all pressing down on him. His nerves are on edge, the familiar bitterness of the past swirling inside him, but he forces himself to go. When he arrives at the restaurant, Ava is already seated, looking just as he remembered, older, but still the same woman who once held his heart. She stands as he walks over, and for a moment, there's a flicker of something between them, a ghost of the connection they once shared. But it quickly fades as they sit down. Ava begins the conversation by explaining her side of the story. She tells Jack that she never wanted to leave him or Ethan. In her voice, there's a hint of regret, but it's tinged with something else, something Jack can't quite place. She talks about the pressures she faced from her family, the expectations placed upon her to succeed in her career, to be a certain kind of woman. According to Ava, her family made it clear that she couldn't have it all, she couldn't be the successful, independent woman they wanted her to be and still be a good mother. She was forced to choose. And in that moment, she chose her career, believing that it was the only way to prove her worth, to be someone in the world. As she talks, Jack listens, but it's as though the words are hitting him like a barrage of stones. It's hard for him to process. The pain of her abandonment, the years of wondering what went wrong, the months of struggling alone with Ethan, it all rushes back in a flood of emotion. How could she have made that choice? How could she have walked away from everything they had built, from their family? Jack feels as though he's suffocating, trapped in the crushing weight of Ava's explanations. And yet, even as the anger surges within him, there's a part of him that wants to understand, to forgive her. But that part of him feels distant, almost unrecognizable. As Ava speaks, the distance between them grows. Her words, meant to explain and perhaps even justify her actions, only serve to widen the emotional chasm between them. Jack's heart, once filled with love for her, now feels like it's been shattered beyond repair. The more Ava talks about her career and the choices she made, the more Jack feels the distance between them becoming insurmountable. She talks about her need to be someone, about the struggles she faced in her family, but Jack can't shake the feeling that she's not truly apologizing, not truly recognizing the damage she's caused. It's as though her career and her success were all that mattered to her, and their family, he and Ethan, were merely casualties in her quest to achieve something more. By the end of the conversation, Jack realizes something he's been avoiding for years: the man he used to be, the one who loved Ava with everything he had, the man who dreamed of a future with her, no longer exists. That man is gone, buried beneath years of pain, resentment, and disappointment. Ava's words, her explanations, only seemed to confirm what Jack had always feared, that the woman he loved had never truly seen him, never truly understood what they had. And as he leaves the lunch, Jack feels a finality in the air, a sense that he has come to the end of something painful, something that can never be undone. The man he was in love with, Ava, is gone, and in his place is someone hardened by loss and betrayal, someone who is learning, finally, to move on. Ethan's curiosity about his mother begins to chip away at the carefully constructed world Jack has built for them. The young boy, growing older and more aware of the gaps in his life, starts asking questions Jack isn't prepared to answer. Each inquiry feels like a silent echo of the past, one Jack thought he had buried long ago. At first, Ethan's questions are simple: why doesn't Mom visit, and why don't we see her anymore? But as the days pass, the questions become harder to avoid. Ethan is not just asking about his mother, he is asking about a part of Jack's past that Jack has spent years trying to leave behind. For Jack, these questions trigger a cascade of emotions: regret, guilt, and a deep-seated fear that he has failed Ethan somehow. Jack never wanted to lie to his son, but he's also been protecting him from the hurt and complications that come with the memory of Ava. He's worked hard to shield Ethan from the details of her departure, keeping the reasons for their separation shrouded in vague explanations. But now, as Ethan grows older and more perceptive, Jack is confronted with the reality that he can't keep pretending everything is fine. He finds himself on the verge of revealing truths he isn't sure Ethan is ready to hear, but more so, truths Jack is not prepared to face himself. Meanwhile, Jack's own life is becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. The carefully constructed routine of being a single parent, providing for Ethan, and maintaining a sense of stability is being shaken by the return of thoughts about Ava. Her absence from their lives has always been a gap Jack has tried to fill with work, time with Ethan, and his own quiet moments of reflection. But the memory of her, the way she made him feel both alive and vulnerable, is starting to pull at him in ways he can't ignore. Reconnecting with Ava feels like an overwhelming temptation, one that promises to breathe new life into his existence. The idea of rebuilding their family, of giving Ethan a chance to have his mother back, stirs something deep inside Jack. There's a flicker of hope in that thought, a hope that things could be different this time. But along with that hope comes fear. Fear of disrupting the fragile balance he has fought so hard to create with Ethan. Jack knows that inviting Ava back into their lives isn't as simple as rekindling an old relationship. There are consequences, emotional, psychological, and practical, that could reverberate for years to come. He wonders if he would be betraying the life he's built with Ethan, a life that has been shaped by sacrifice and struggle. The thought of exposing Ethan to the kind of heartbreak that defined Jack and Ava's relationship weighs heavily on him. Jack's internal conflict becomes more pronounced when he receives a call from his boss. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. A major car dealership is interested in hiring him as a lead mechanic. The job would be a significant step forward in Jack's career, one that could offer financial stability and open doors for the future. The idea of a better, more secure life for him and Ethan is incredibly tempting. But with this new opportunity comes a slew of complications. The job would require a move possibly far from where they are now, leaving behind the life Jack has carefully built in their small town. It's a dream opportunity, one Jack can't afford to overlook, but it arrives at a moment when his emotions are already stretched thin. As he grapples with this decision, Jack finds himself torn between the promise of a fresh start with Ava and the weight of his responsibility to Ethan. He can't help but wonder if accepting the job would be the right step for their future, or if it would only complicate things further. The prospect of a bigger salary, a better home, and a more comfortable life for Ethan is alluring, but Jack also knows that he can't take these steps forward without considering how they'll affect his son. Meanwhile, Ava's push for more involvement in Ethan's life is growing more insistent. She reaches out more frequently, offering financial support and promising a brighter future for her son. While Jack is still hesitant to let her back in, he begins to see that Ava is sincere in her desire to be part of Ethan's life. There's a part of Jack that wants to believe she's changed, that she can be the mother Ethan deserves, but he also wonders if it's too late. Ethan is no longer the infant she left behind. He's a young boy with opinions, desires, and the beginnings of his own understanding of the world. Will bringing Ava back into the picture help or harm their fragile relationship? Ava's promises of a better life for Ethan hang over Jack like a cloud. There are moments when Jack wishes he could simply forget about the past, forget about Ava, and focus entirely on the present. He's built a stable life, with his own values and routines. But every time Ava reaches out, Jack finds himself questioning his choices. Is he being fair to Ethan by keeping him away from his mother? Is he being selfish by holding on to his own anger and resentment? The pull of the past and the possibility of a future with Ava is strong, but Jack knows that he can't have it both ways. He can't build a life with Ava and keep things exactly as they are with Ethan. Something, or someone, will have to give. In the midst of this emotional whirlwind, Jack finally reaches a decision. He knows he can't keep avoiding the questions Ethan is asking, and he knows that he can't keep pretending that his feelings for Ava don't exist. Jack decides to take a risk, a step toward healing, if not for himself, then for Ethan. He reaches out to Ava, agreeing to allow her to be more involved in Ethan's life. It's not an easy decision, and Jack feels the weight of it pressing on him. But he knows that this is the first step toward opening a door that has been closed for far too long. Jack isn't sure what the future holds, or what kind of impact this decision will have on their lives, but he's willing to take the risk. The consequences could be far-reaching both for him and for Ethan, but Jack is ready to face whatever comes next, knowing that he can't change the past, only move forward. Jack sat on the couch, his fingers idly drumming against the armrest, his mind racing. The sound of Ethan's laughter echoed from the kitchen, where he and Ava were preparing dinner together. The joy in Ethan's voice, the easy affection between mother and son, it should have felt like a moment of triumph. It should have felt like a victory. After all, Jack had made the decision to bring Ava back into their lives, to give her a second chance, for Ethan's sake. But instead, he felt a growing unease settle deep in his chest. He had done what he thought was right, but now, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. Ava had re-entered their lives so seamlessly, like she had never been gone. It was as if she had never abandoned them in the first place. The same comforting presence, the same gentle voice that had once soothed Ethan, was now back in full force. Ethan was overjoyed, of course. His mother's return was like a dream come true. It was everything he had longed for during the years she had been absent. Jack could see the way Ethan clung to her, his eyes full of admiration and trust, his need for her love palpable in every glance. But for Jack, the shift was unsettling. He watched Ava slip back into the role of doting mother with a grace that both amazed and frustrated him. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness. It was as though she had never been gone. Ethan was delighted, soaking up her attention and affection, while Jack found himself increasingly relegated to the role of provider and disciplinarian, the one who enforced rules, set boundaries, and kept everything running smoothly. Jack didn't mind being the responsible one, he had always played that role, but now, it felt different. The balance of power in their family dynamic had shifted. The ease with which Ava reintegrated herself into their lives had made him feel like an outsider in his own home. He used to be Ethan's sole pillar of stability, the one his son could always count on. But now, Ethan's loyalty seemed to be shifting away from him. It was as though the return of Ava had reformed an unspoken bond between mother and son that left Jack standing at the periphery. The discomfort grew each day. Ava had promised that things would be different this time, that she was committed to being there for both Jack and Ethan, but Jack could see the cracks forming. Ava's career, which had always been a constant force in their lives, was once again pulling her away from the family. Her late nights in the office, the business trips that took her away for days at a time, the phone calls that interrupted their family moments, it was all too familiar. She was still the same Ava who had put her ambition ahead of her family, and Jack could feel the strain of it once again. The promises she made to him and Ethan often felt like empty words. She would tell Ethan that she would be home for dinner, only to have another meeting run late. She would promise Jack that they would spend the weekend together as a family, only for something urgent to come up. Jack tried not to let it get to him. He had known from the start that Ava's career would always be a priority for her, and he had tried to accommodate that. But there was something about the way she seemed to glide back into her life as a millionaire CEO that made him feel small, insignificant even. It wasn't that Jack resented her success, he was proud of her accomplishments, in fact. It was just that the longer she stayed immersed in her world of boardrooms and contracts, the more disconnected she became from their son. And as Ava drifted further into her own orbit, Jack began to notice something else. Ethan was changing too. Where once he had relied on Jack for comfort, stability, and guidance, now he seemed to look to Ava for everything. The shift was subtle at first. Ethan would turn to Jack for a hug or a word of advice, only to find that his attention was already elsewhere, absorbed in some project with Ava. It was a small thing, but Jack could feel it in his bones. The emotional distance between him and his son was growing, and the void was being filled by Ava's presence. It wasn't that Ethan didn't love Jack anymore. Far from it. But the bond between them, the one that had once been unshakable, was being tested. And Jack couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake in allowing Ava back into their lives. Maybe, in trying to give Ethan the family he had always wanted, he had set in motion a series of events that would end up driving him further away from both of them. The frustration started to mount. Jack found himself spending more time at work, trying to escape the growing tension at home. But the more time he spent away, the more alienated he felt. There were moments when he would come home to find Ava on the phone with one of her executives or working late at the dining table, while Ethan was curled up in front of the TV, glued to his mother's old movies. Jack tried to talk to Ava about it, to express how he felt, but she was always quick to brush it off. "I'm just doing what's necessary," she would say. "We need the money. I need to do this for us, for our future." But Jack didn't want to hear about their future. He wanted to hear that she was there for their present, that she was willing to put in the work to make their family whole again. He wasn't asking her to give up her career, but he needed her to be present, to show up for Ethan in the ways she had promised. It came to a head one evening when Jack had come home from a late shift, only to find Ethan already asleep, his bedroom door half open. Ava was on the phone again, her voice low but firm, negotiating some deal he couldn't quite make out. Jack stood in the doorway, the weight of everything finally settling in. He had tried, for so long, to be patient, to hold on to the hope that things would work themselves out. But he couldn't ignore it any longer. "Enough, Ava," Jack said, his voice tight with emotion. She looked up, startled. "What do you mean, enough?" "I mean, enough with the excuses," Jack said, stepping into the room. "You can't keep doing this, Ava. You can't keep pretending everything's fine when you're never really here. You're not here for Ethan. You're not here for me. And I can't keep carrying this family on my own while you chase your career." Ava's face tightened, the familiar defensiveness creeping in. "You don't understand, Jack. This is for us. For our future. For Ethan's future. I don't care about the future if we're not here in the present," Jack shot back. "I want us to rebuild our family. But you can't do that if you keep prioritizing everything else but us." There was a long silence as Ava absorbed his words. For a moment, Jack wondered if she would brush him off again, as she had so many times before. But this time, she didn't. Instead, her face softened, and she let out a heavy sigh. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to balance everything anymore. I've been so focused on my career that I've forgotten what really matters." Jack took a step toward her, his heart heavy with the weight of the conversation. "We need you here, Ava. Ethan needs you here. I need you here." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Jack saw a flicker of vulnerability in Ava's eyes. She wasn't the same confident, driven woman who had left them all those years ago. She was still that woman, but she was also someone else, a woman who was learning, slowly, that some things were more important than success. It wasn't a resolution, not yet. But it was a beginning. Jack had forced the truth to the surface, and now it was up to both of them to figure out how to navigate the shifting tide of their family, one step at a time. Ava's world had always been shaped by ambition, her relentless pursuit of success, her career-driven mindset, her unwavering focus on the top. But it wasn't until Jack's confrontation that she was forced to truly reckon with the reality of what that success had cost her. In that moment, something inside Ava shifted. The words Jack had thrown at her, the accusations of neglect, were not just about their relationship but about her entire life's trajectory. For the first time, Ava stopped and took stock of the wreckage she had left behind, particularly in her relationship with Ethan, her son. The realization hit her like a wave. Her absence from his life wasn't just a series of missed moments or forgotten birthday parties, it was a deep, emotional void that Ethan had felt long before she had ever acknowledged it. She could no longer deny that her focus on climbing the corporate ladder, on achieving the next promotion or closing the next deal, had come at a tremendous personal cost. Her relationship with Ethan had withered in the shadows of her career, and the childlike innocence she had once been able to nurture in him had slowly given way to a more guarded, distant version of the boy she barely recognized. For years, Ava had convinced herself that her career was the key to providing a better life for Ethan, that the wealth and success she built would eventually compensate for the time she had sacrificed. But the truth became undeniable as she looked at her reflection in the mirror, both literally and metaphorically. She had neglected the one relationship that mattered most, and now the distance between her and Ethan seemed insurmountable. She had not just lost time, she had lost his trust. As she sat down to reflect on this painful realization, the weight of her choices became almost suffocating. It wasn't just about missing moments, though that was part of it. It was about what those moments represented: the quiet talks before bed, the shared laughter, the everyday bonding that she had missed out on in the pursuit of success. Ava could see how much Ethan had changed during those years. He had grown quieter, more independent. At times, he seemed like a stranger, a child whose needs she had ignored while she chased her professional dreams. The emotional turning point came when Ava made the decision to take action, to change course before it was too late. She could no longer continue down the path she had chosen. No more justifying her career choices by pointing to the future. No more pretending that her material success was enough to make up for the lack of emotional presence in her family. With Jack's words echoing in her mind, Ava finally offered to step back from her career. She wasn't just thinking about taking a short break or working fewer hours, she was prepared to make a much larger sacrifice. She was willing to step down from her position as CEO, to take a leave of absence, and focus solely on rebuilding her relationship with Ethan. It was a monumental decision. Ava had spent years building her career from the ground up, fighting tooth and nail to prove herself in a world that was often unforgiving to women, especially in positions of power. To walk away from that, even temporarily, felt like a profound loss. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and giving it all up, even if for just a while, was terrifying. But Ava knew it was necessary. She had to make a choice not just for her career, but for her family. When she shared her decision with her family and colleagues, the reactions were mixed. Her colleagues were shocked, unable to comprehend why she would take such a drastic step. As a leader, Ava had always been seen as unshakable, resolute, and driven. To take a leave of absence was not just unexpected, it was unheard of. Her family, too, was stunned. Her parents, especially, had always been proud of her achievements, had always encouraged her to aim higher, to reach for more. To step away from that world was something they couldn't easily understand. Jack, still hesitant and deeply hurt, watched from the sidelines as Ava tried to make amends. Though his heart was torn between wanting to believe in her and feeling betrayed by her absence, there was a part of him that couldn't ignore the sincerity in her voice. For the first time, Ava wasn't just apologizing, she was taking real, concrete steps to change. But even as Jack saw the vulnerability in her decision, he couldn't help but remain cautious. Trust, for him, was not something that could be easily rebuilt. Ava's actions had created cracks in their relationship, and Jack knew it would take more than a gesture to heal the damage. Ethan, on the other hand, responded with a childlike innocence that both broke and healed Ava's heart in equal measure. When she told him that she would be spending more time with him, his face lit up with a smile so pure it nearly brought Ava to tears. "You mean we can hang out more, like we used to?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. To Ethan, there was no resentment, no bitterness about her absence. He simply welcomed her back with open arms, eager to fill the void with her presence. But while Ethan was ready to forgive and embrace her, Jack was not. Jack's wounds ran deeper, and the pain of raising their son largely on his own for so many years still lingered. Though he was grateful for Ava's decision to step back from her career, he knew that their family dynamics had been altered forever. Ava's absence had left him with the responsibility of not just being a father but being both a mother and a father in many ways. It was a role he had never signed up for, but he had done it out of love for Ethan. Now, as Ava sought to return to her role as a mother, Jack had to come to terms with the fact that this wasn't just about her reconnection with their son, it was about rethinking their entire family structure. Jack had to learn how to trust Ava again, but more importantly, he had to learn to trust himself as a father who had been making decisions in her absence, decisions that had been necessary at the time but had left emotional scars. The chapter ended with a pivotal moment between Jack and Ava. They sat down for a heart-to-heart conversation, the weight of their past between them. Jack, still wary, listened as Ava poured out her heart, explaining the struggle she had faced, the pain of realizing what she had missed, and the commitment she now felt to rebuild their family. She wasn't asking for instant forgiveness or for things to go back to the way they were. She was asking for a chance, just a chance to make things right. Jack, for the first time in a long time, allowed himself to open up, sharing the fears and frustrations he had carried alone for years. The conversation wasn't easy. It wasn't about sweeping things under the rug or pretending that everything was fine. It was raw, honest, and filled with both love and pain. But as they talked, a small but significant shift occurred. They began to see each other not just as partners but as two people who had been deeply affected by their choices and who now had a shared goal: to rebuild, to heal, and to move forward together. Jack and Ava sat at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the otherwise quiet house. The tension between them had become almost palpable over the last few months, an undercurrent that neither of them could avoid. The years of distance, misunderstandings, and broken trust were not things you simply erased with a few apologies or grand gestures. Yet, here they were, at the threshold of something neither of them knew how to navigate: rebuilding their family. Ava had put her career on hold, making the conscious decision to step back from her fast-paced work life and focus on reconnecting with Ethan. The choice had come with sacrifices, and it was not one she had made lightly. Her professional identity had been a source of pride for years, and now it was something she had to let go of, at least for a while, in order to heal the broken relationships that had defined her personal life. Ethan, now 14, had grown distant over the years, his teenage aloofness exacerbated by the absence of his mother in his day-to-day life. Reconnecting with him wasn't going to be easy, but Ava was determined to try. At first, their attempts to communicate were awkward, clumsy, even. Ava had no idea how to bridge the gap between them, and Ethan's reticence made it all the more difficult. Their conversations often felt forced, filled with awkward pauses and failed attempts at small talk. She missed the easy connection they once had, the way they used to laugh together over silly things. But Ethan's walls were high, built up over the years of hurt and absence. Ava couldn't blame him for that. But slowly, things began to shift. Ethan had always loved to draw, and one evening, as Ava was cleaning up in the living room, she noticed a sketchpad on the coffee table. She picked it up, thumbing through the pages filled with elaborate drawings of landscapes, creatures, and abstract patterns. She smiled to herself, quietly impressed by his talent. Without thinking, she grabbed a pen and added a small doodle of her own to the last page, a simple tree with branches reaching out in all directions. The next morning, she found the sketchpad on the kitchen counter, with a small note attached to it: "I like your tree." It was a simple gesture, but one that felt like a breakthrough. Slowly, in little moments like that, Ava and Ethan began to reconnect. The conversations were still awkward, but they began to come more easily, and the gaps of silence grew shorter. Jack, too, was navigating his own transformation. His resentment toward Ava had been a constant undercurrent in their relationship, even when they were simply coexisting under the same roof. The way she had prioritized her career over their family, over him, had cut deep, and the pain of that abandonment had been hard to let go of. Jack had always been the more pragmatic of the two, and he'd buried his emotions for years, choosing to focus on the tangible things: work, bills, daily life, anything that kept his mind from the wound he carried. But as Ava made efforts to reconnect with Ethan, Jack began to see a shift in her. He watched her sacrifice her career, her independence, and, perhaps most importantly, her own pride. He saw the pain in her eyes, the desire to make things right, and for the first time, he could tell she wasn't just doing it because it was expected of her. She was trying. Ava was trying to rebuild the pieces of their family that had been shattered for so long. Jack knew that while Ava could never erase the past, she was doing her best to make up for it. The resentment that had clung to him began to wane, replaced by a complicated mix of acceptance and respect. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but Jack realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about acknowledging the past, accepting the flaws in themselves and each other, and finding a way forward. He began to let go of his bitterness, realizing that holding on to it only kept him tethered to the past. He didn't want to live there anymore. Co-parenting wasn't easy either. The dynamics between Jack and Ava had always been complicated, even when they were married. They had different approaches to everything: parenting, finances, even the way they viewed the world. Blending their very different lifestyles felt like an uphill battle, and there were moments when the tension was palpable. Jack was more of a strict, by-the-book parent, while Ava had always been more laid back, more inclined to bend the rules to accommodate Ethan's needs. It was a delicate balance, and they often found themselves at odds over what was best for Ethan. Yet, despite their differences, they were learning. Slowly, they began to find common ground, finding ways to compromise and create a united front. It wasn't perfect, but they both recognized that their goal wasn't to agree on everything. It was to give Ethan a sense of stability and love, something that had been lacking for too long. Their relationship also began to evolve in ways neither of them had expected. There were no grand romantic gestures, no declarations of love, just quiet moments of understanding and mutual respect. Jack began to see Ava not just as his ex-wife, but as a partner in the true sense of the word. He admired her willingness to sacrifice so much for their family, her determination to make things right, and the love she had for Ethan that was now front and center in her life. Ava, too, saw Jack in a new light. She saw the pain he had carried, the sacrifices he had made, and the way he had always been there for Ethan, even when he was angry with her. They weren't the same people they had been when they first met, and the relationship they were building now was different, more mature, more grounded in reality. It was less about romance and more about partnership, a deep, quiet understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. As the weeks passed, Jack, Ava, and Ethan began to find a new rhythm in their lives. It wasn't without challenges. There were still moments of tension, of miscommunication, of doubts, but they were learning, step by step, to navigate the complexities of their new reality. And in the midst of that, they began to heal. For Ethan, it was a slow and sometimes painful process, but the more time he spent with his parents, the more he began to trust them again. The walls he had built around himself began to come down, bit by bit. One evening, as they all sat around the dining table, something simple but significant happened. It was just a regular family dinner, nothing extravagant, just pizza and salad, but it felt different. The atmosphere was relaxed, the conversation light. They joked about work, talked about Ethan's school projects, and even laughed at a stupid joke Jack made. For the first time in years, it felt like a real family meal. There were no walls between them, no unresolved tensions. Just three people, together, sharing a moment of peace. As they finished eating, Jack looked over at Ava, then at Ethan, and for the first time in a long while, he felt hope. This wasn't the end of their journey, it was just the beginning. But in that moment, they were together, and that was enough. Ava sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting soft shadows on the walls. Outside, the world was waking up, but inside, Ava felt frozen in place, as though time had come to a standstill. Her mind was a swirl of conflicting thoughts, each one pulling her in a different direction. It had all started with a phone call, an unexpected one that had set everything into motion. The offer to take over the rival company had come as a surprise. Ava had worked hard to get to the top before, only to walk away when she realized that the demands of being a CEO were incompatible with her life at home. But now, the opportunity was back on the table. The job would restore her to the position she had once held with pride and ambition, returning her to the fast-paced world of high-powered business. But in the months since she had stepped away from the corporate world, her life had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was no longer the single-minded career woman she once was. She was a mother. A partner. A woman with a new set of responsibilities that she couldn't ignore. Jack stood in the doorway, watching her as she sat, lost in thought. He had been following her every movement, trying to gauge her emotions, but Ava was an enigma right now. He could see the internal struggle on her face, the way she was caught between two worlds, two very different versions of herself. Jack knew this decision wasn't going to be easy for her. He understood the weight of it, probably more than anyone else could. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, stepping into the room and taking a seat across from her. Ava didn't look up right away. She stared at the swirling coffee in her cup, trying to calm the storm inside her. "I don't know what to do, Jack," she finally said, her voice low, tinged with frustration. "This opportunity, it's everything I worked for. It's the chance to prove to myself, to the world, that I can be the woman I once was, the woman I know I can be." Jack nodded, but he didn't interrupt. He knew her well enough to know that she was just sorting through her thoughts out loud. This wasn't just about the job for Ava, it was about reclaiming something she had lost when she became a mother, when she chose family over career. And now, with the possibility of returning to the world she had once thrived in, she was torn between the ambition that had once driven her and the family that now grounded her. "But then there's Ellie," Ava continued, her voice breaking slightly. "She's just starting to walk, to talk. She needs me, Jack. And I can't help but feel like if I take this job, I'll be abandoning her." Jack leaned forward, his eyes filled with understanding. "Ava, you're not abandoning anyone. You've been the best mother to her. This is just a part of who you are too. You can't ignore that." "I don't want you to ignore it." Ava sighed deeply, her gaze meeting Jack's for the first time. "I want it all, Jack. I want to be there for her and still have the career I've worked so hard for. But I don't know how to balance it all. I can't keep doing this, being pulled in so many different directions." Jack reached out, taking her hand gently in his. He knew how much this was weighing on her. He had seen her go through the motions of being a full-time mother, the pride she took in watching Ellie grow. But he also knew that the drive, the hunger she had for success in the business world, was still alive within her. It wasn't something that would go away. It was a part of who she was, just as much as her role as a mother was. "You don't have to do this alone," Jack said, his voice firm but compassionate. "I'm here. I'll support whatever decision you make. If you want to go back to work, I'll be here to take care of Ellie. I'll make sure she's okay. But if you want to stay home, that's fine too. I'll make it work. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself." The sincerity in Jack's voice touched something deep inside Ava. She had known from the moment they met that he was a good man, a man who would support her no matter what, but hearing those words now, in the context of this decision, made her feel both comforted and conflicted. Could she really step back into the business world and still be the mother she wanted to be? Could she balance both worlds without sacrificing one for the other? As the days passed, Ava wrestled with her emotions, her desires, and the growing pressure to make a decision. The offer from the company was not going to wait forever. She had to make a choice, one that would define the next chapter of her life, for better or for worse. Each time she thought she had made up her mind, doubts crept in. The guilt of leaving Ellie, even for a few hours each day, gnawed at her. But then the allure of returning to the fast-paced world of business, the world where she was in control, where she was respected, where she could prove her worth again, pulled at her like a magnetic force. One evening, after Ellie had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Ava sat alone on the couch, her head in her hands. The weight of the decision was crushing her. She loved her family more than anything, but she also loved her work, her career, and the feeling of accomplishment that came with it. Was she really ready to let go of that part of herself? Jack sat down next to her, sensing her turmoil. He didn't ask her what was wrong this time, he just waited, letting her process in her own way. After a long silence, Ava spoke. "I keep thinking about what you said, that I don't have to do this alone. But I also keep thinking about how much I've changed, how much I want to change. I don't want to lose myself in the process. I want to be a mother, but I also want to be someone who can stand on her own 2 feet outside of that role." Jack nodded, his expression softening. "I get that. And I want you to have both, Ava. I want you to follow your dreams. But we'll figure it out together. I promise." Ava looked up at him, her eyes filled with both uncertainty and resolve. "I've made a decision," she said, her voice steady. "I'm going to take the job." Jack's face lit up with a mixture of relief and pride. But Ava wasn't done yet. She took a deep breath, her words coming faster now, with clarity. "But not the way I expected. I'm going to take the job, but I'm going to set boundaries. I'm not going to let it consume me like it did before. I'm going to make sure I'm still present for Ellie, for us. I don't want to lose the balance we've found." Jack smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'm with you, Ava. Whatever that looks like, I'm here." In that moment, Ava realized that the decision wasn't just about choosing between career and family, it was about creating a new path that allowed her to have both. It was bold. It was unexpected. And it was exactly what she needed. Ava sat quietly at the kitchen table, the soft morning light filtering through the windows and casting a warm glow over the room. She had been so focused for so long on climbing the corporate ladder, on securing her place in the world of power and wealth, that she had lost sight of the very things that had always mattered most. Her life had become a series of meetings, deadlines, and ambitions, all while the world she truly cared about, her family, had slipped into the background. Now, as she sat there, looking out the window at the peaceful morning, a realization washed over her. The true riches in her life were not the accolades or the title she had once yearned for. It was the people she loved, the ones who had always been there for her, even when she had been too blind to see it. Jack, her partner, had always been the steady presence in her life, the one who had held their family together even when she had been too consumed by her career to appreciate it. But now, something had shifted in him too. He had found a sense of confidence, not in the world of business, but in his role as a father. There was a peace in their home now, one that had been absent for years. Jack was no longer the man who doubted his ability to lead their family or second-guessed every decision. He had come into his own, embracing the role of both father and partner with a quiet strength that Ava had always admired, even if she had failed to fully acknowledge it before. Ethan, their son, was thriving in this new atmosphere. The bond between them all had grown stronger with each passing day. Ava could see the change in him, the way he smiled more, how his confidence blossomed as both of his parents were present in ways they hadn't been before. The chaos of their lives had finally quieted, and in its place was a new rhythm, one that felt grounded in love and connection. Ava thought back to the moments that had led to this change. There had been a time when she believed that success meant power, money, and status. She had worked tirelessly to prove herself in a world that often told her she was not enough. But as the years went on, she had realized that those things, those external markers of success, had never truly filled the emptiness she sometimes felt inside. What truly mattered were the quiet moments spent with her family, the laughter they shared, the way Ethan's eyes lit up when he saw his father walk through the door at the end of the day. Those were the moments that had become her definition of success, and now, she understood that no career accomplishment, no amount of wealth, could ever compare to the richness of these connections. Jack, for his part, had always wanted to be the kind of father who was present in his son's life. For a long time, he felt he had failed in this regard. Ava's ambition had taken up so much of their time, and the emotional distance between them had only widened as they both focused on their individual pursuits. But since the shift in their priorities, Jack had become more involved in Ethan's life than ever before. He had found a new sense of purpose in being there for his son, helping him with school projects, attending his soccer games, and just being the constant figure in his life that every child needed. It was something Jack had once feared he couldn't provide, but now, with Ava by his side, he knew he was doing it right. Together, they had found a new kind of peace, a peace that came from understanding that success wasn't about climbing higher or accumulating more, it was about connection, love, and presence. They had both given up certain ambitions in order to find something far more valuable, each other, and their family. Ava had decided to scale back her career ambitions, no longer striving for the next promotion or chasing after the next big deal. Instead, she chose to focus on what truly mattered. She realized that the time she had with her family was irreplaceable, and she wanted to be fully present in it. No longer would she measure her worth by the hours she worked or the accolades she received. Her worth was now tied to her role as a mother, a partner, and a person who could offer unconditional love and support to those she cared about most. The changes in their home were evident in the smallest of moments. The evening dinners, once hurried and filled with distractions, were now a time for conversation, laughter, and connection. Ethan no longer felt like a bystander in his parents' lives. He was part of the foundation of their family, and he could feel the love that surrounded him. Ava and Jack made sure to prioritize him, to be present with him, and to create memories that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. The busy schedules that had once defined their existence had been replaced by shared experiences and a sense of togetherness that had been long missing. That afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Jack and Ava stood together on the porch, watching Ethan play in the yard. He was running around, laughing, his energy boundless as he kicked a soccer ball across the grass. Ava's heart swelled as she watched her son, his joy contagious. She looked at Jack, their eyes meeting for a brief moment, and in that glance, they both understood what had changed. They had found their way back to each other, back to their family, and it was everything they had been searching for. For the first time in a long while, they both knew that family was the greatest success they could ever hope to achieve. All the ambition, the drive, the desire for more had paled in comparison to the quiet fulfillment that came from being together, from supporting each other through the challenges of life, and from building a future not based on external measures of success, but on love, respect, and mutual understanding. Ava rested her hand on Jack's arm, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching Ethan run across the yard. There was a sense of peace that hung in the air, a peace that came from knowing they were exactly where they were meant to be. Their future was no longer defined by the pursuit of individual goals, but by the shared dream of a happy, healthy family. Together, they would navigate whatever came next united, strong, and more in love than ever before. In the end, Ava realized that it wasn't about scaling back her ambitions or giving up on her dreams, it was about redefining them. She had found a new purpose, one that centered on the people who mattered most. And as she looked at Jack and Ethan, she knew they had built something far more valuable than any career or fortune. They had built a home, a family, and a love that would carry them through whatever the future might hold.